Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to have a fun talk about the mafia. You know, those family friendly people. Before I get started, I want to talk about a few things, though. I'm going to be talking today about the mafia, but I'm going to go there all the way through. But today, I'm going to start with the most recent case of the mafia, which has to do with the people in charge right now, like Donald Trump or the Don. So people are all talking about, boy, he's sure getting authoritarian. Yeah, that's the plan, right? Remember, the United States is a corporation. He's merely taking over as president of the corporation. Not much to see here, besides all the lies about who the United States is and why we're even here. But let's talk about these people and their backgrounds. Like, what is the history of Trump? Well, he did go to military school as a child. His dad hated just about everybody, including his own brother, who everyone seemed to pit against each other. They seemed to be lacking in empathy. Psychopaths do not have empathy or consciousness. So, what I'd like to explore along with this mafia business is how did these people get this way? Like, people think that these people are so brave, but I say behind every person and every psychopath is nothing but a coward. They're all bluff and huff. That's why they always get people from behind. But before I get started, but before, wait a minute, let me back up here a second. But this is going to bring up a topic that we need to explore about our own empathy. For example, should we even feel empathy for some of these poor rich kids like Trump? I would have to argue that I personally feel empathy for these people. And you're going to think, whoa, why would you feel empathy for a psychopath? Well, I don't believe that any child should be raised the way these people are raised. They're basically pitted against each other. The parents have no empathy. They're raised by psychopaths themselves. And just because they don't have any empathy, that makes them psychopaths. I think in order for us to clearly be sure of who we are, we need to feel how do we fit into all this? Because I feel empathy for them. I would feel empathy for anyone that had the kind of background that they had. But that does not mean that I would do anything to help them. I can have empathy and also stay at a distance. That does not mean I have to agree with them. That does not mean I would not turn on them, but I can still maintain my own human sense of empathy that I don't want to see getting lost in all this. And there's been a lot of talk as far as, in the past, I've spoken for a few years now as far as these Kigali principles. And it's my position still today that at one point in the near future, the Kigali principles will activate the United Nations to be on the streets here. In the event of any kind of conflict, they will have authorization. It's already a done deal. So, what would trigger the Kigali principles? Well, let me give you a list from the United Nations themselves. A breakdown of governance or large scale violence. Gee, pitting everybody against each other doesn't sound like violence to me. The UN would need to determine that the US government is unwilling or unable to protect its population, leading to mass civilian suffering. It would also need UN Security Council authorization. Any peacekeeping mission would require a resolution, and the United States, as a permanent member of the Security Council, holds the veto power. The United States could block any such decision, or it might need international consensus. The global community would have to agree that the situation in the United States justifies intervention, an extraordinary and unlikely scenario for a powerful, functioning state. Well, we're not going to be a functioning state soon. It goes on to say, in reality, even if protests become widespread or violent, the U.S. has extensive domestic services, National Guard, law enforcement, federal agencies that are all designed to manage civil unrest. International peacekeeping forces entering the U.S. under the Kigali principles would be unprecedented. Another person that could weigh in, the International Criminal Court or the ICC could weigh in, but their role is specific and limited to addressing serious crimes under international law, namely genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, the crime of aggression. For the ICC to act in a situation involving the United States, they would have to line up a few things. The jurisdiction. The U.S. is not a member of the ICC, but the ICC can still claim jurisdiction if the alleged crimes happen in a member state's territory. For example, a U.S. citizen commits crimes in a country that is a ICC member. The UN Security Council refers to the situation to the ICC. Again, the U.S. could veto this. But then remember, the U.S. could also pull out of the UN before all this happens, right? And then a non-member state accepts the ICC jurisdiction voluntarily for a specific case. Types of crimes. The ICC wouldn't get involved for general civil unrest or political disputes. They'd step in only if credible evidence emerges of high-level officials, including heads of state committing or enabling mass killings, torture or systematic oppression, forced displacement, persecution of a group. For example, if widespread violence erupted and a leader deliberately targeted protesters as an ethnic, political, or social group, that could qualify as crimes against humanity. But even if the ICC technically has jurisdiction enforcing its rulings, it's tricky. Its court relies on member states to arrest suspects. So yeah, well, the ICC, I will be getting back to more about the ICC later. I think this thing will probably happen through the United Nations. And of course, Trump is always talking about pulling out of these organizations, right? So it'd be pretty simple. Pull out of the United Nations, cause a lot of ruckus. They meet over in Europe like they're meeting now, talking about the Americans have gone crazy. We've got to step up and do something. They've got that Donald Trump in charge. Everybody's going nuts. They were never this way before. Oh yes, we were. This is the plan, not the bug in the system. Okay. So how did I even get started on this mafia business? Well, it's kind of coming full circle because the Don is now trying to enact the Alien Enemies Act. What's the Alien Enemies Act? Well, it's a wartime authority that allows the president to detain or deport the natives and citizens of an enemy nation without a hearing and based on only their country of birth or citizenship. It has been invoked just 3 times in American history, each during a major conflict. The War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. It is best known for its role in Japanese incarceration during World War II, a shameful part of U.S. history for which Congress and several presidents have apologized. Well, it's funny they should mention this thing with Japan, right? It's funny they should mention it because that is exactly how I got started on all of this mafia business because I read that the mafia, the group out of Chicago, I'm still reading this book about them. There's a group out, the mafia families in New York, and we got the group out of Chicago, okay? The group out of Chicago. I'll have a lot more later because today I'm just going to start with present history. But how did I get here? Well, I've been looking into the group out of Chicago, the mafia group. And then, then I read that the incarceration of the Japanese under this act was because they wanted to steal all their assets because Japanese people in this country had a lot of assets at that time. So the mafia being run out of Chicago under and I'll be getting more specific later, under those Pritzker people, that gypsy group, yeah, that mafia group there was the one who did the sting. So that group was the one who went in and got FDR to inter all those Japanese people. So literally, so they could have all of their assets stolen. So that's how I started on this whole mafia thing, because for years I've been saying that it's my belief that when the mafia wore down, the when the mafia wore down with the John Gotti trials, what happened next? Well, Silicon Valley. So I will be proving my point to that, but it's going to be a long road to get there. But anyway, so let's talk more about who are they? How do they interact? Trump was trained by a guy named Roy Cohn, Cohn. And how did Trump repay him? Well, Trump repaid him at the end when Cohn was dying. Trump gave him a set of fake Tiffany diamond cufflinks. Yeah, that was how he paid him off for helping him set up his whole thing going. So Trump, or the Don, was trained by Roy Cohn, who was a mafia attorney, okay? And I'll be having a couple of clips that I'll be playing because Roy Cohn starts with a very interesting part in this history. He started with the first deal with these people called the Rosenbergs, with the say they were stealing nuclear things. So Cohn intersects into this mafia thing as a mafia attorney for the mafia or the fixer. But Cohn was also the person who trained Donald Trump. So and then I'll also be able to show you how it all works together because they have all of their business experts and all of these people. And they also have this theory that everybody must be rich or want to be scheming to get rich, right? Because a lot of things go along with this mob thing. I mean, their whole structure happened. And I'll be able to show you some real patterns here. So, um, the Alien Enemies Act is being touted by Trump right now, so that tells you we're coming full circle with the mafia stuff, right? Uh, so let's talk a little bit about how people like Trump were raised. They were raised as children in very odd ways that most of us would not be familiar with. They were sent off to boarding schools, a lot of separations from their parents. Do they even know who their mother is? The majority of them were not born by their own mother. So there's a very complex relationship starting here from the very beginning that they don't really know who their own mother is. They've never really bonded with their own mother because they don't know who their mother is. And the woman in charge, pretending to be their mother, is the one who's really sending them off to boarding school. You know, mom and dad drive them up to this big, expensive boarding school, and they drop off the little tot, 5 or 6 years old, to be taken care of by the boarding school people. So they develop a very complex relationship within their own families because there's a lot of betrayal, a lot of just being dumped off with people and things. So they have a lot going into them as they're growing up because people now are talking about Elon Musk and Trump being so childish. Well, I believe it's because how they're raised, because if you don't have the right nurturing and all of that, it's like when people become addicts, they're usually trying to bury something within themselves, right? And then there's people who might just be partying for a short period that don't become addicts. Well, a lot of these people, the Elon Musk and the Don, have become what appear to be drug addicts also, and I'll be getting more into that later. But so this does not speak of happy people. Happy people don't run around taking drugs and doing all these kinds of things like they're doing. They don't have an affinity for cocaine and all that. And yes, I'll be covering the whole business as far as where they're running the business out of the cocaine and all of that. But it's going to have to be done in certain segments. So, but today I'm just going to be focused on what their personalities tell us about them. Because right now they're being forced to see a reality they've never considered. When you're a psychopath, the world evolves around you, and the rest of us are just unnecessary things out there in your way. So the fact that somebody would stand up and jeer against you and call you names or try to call you out publicly would have a huge effect on a person who is already a very fragile ego, right? Because they were raised without any encouragement. Like, for example, I've been looking into some of these different families, like the Murdoch family. They're all arguing with each other, right? They've got one kid that Lockton is agreeing with Rupert Murdoch, and the other three kids are on the other side. Well, they claim that they got there because they were raised to constantly compete with each other. They were constantly pitted against each other. And also, like Donald Trump, the Don, his niece, Mary Trump, she's on social media talking about how they were raised. It is actually when you listen to Mary Trump talk about this stuff, She is a person riddled with pain. You see it all over her face when she's telling these stories to communicate how their family interacted. The entire Trump family was also pitted against each other. He had the older brother, Fred Trump, who became an alcoholic and was dead by the time he was like 40 because of the shaming of the family around him. I mean, they would mock him in public. So they grow up demeaning their other siblings. They grow up at the power of their parents, and they grow up in some pretty bizarre ways. At least that's my opinion. So it also it's going to be more and more obvious because remember, these are people who are obviously now still engaging in drugs. They're not engaging, it doesn't appear to be a lot of sleep. Their behaviors are becoming more erratic. So, yeah, do I see a point that down the road they'll go, oh, those Americans are so crazy, we got to call in the United Nations. Let's bring the peacekeepers in. Let's bring peace to the United States. Yeah, I've been seeing this for a few years now. I see it as clear as a bell in my head. So I did a little chat with Chat GBT about Elon Musk. Um, so I asked Chat GPT about his drug use because they're also talking about they're raising ethical concerns. Yeah, I mean these are con men, right? They sit there and they go, well, Elon doesn't have any conflicts, and if he has any, he's certainly going to let me know. Well, yes, con men are going to con, right? So anyway, and is there any logic in this? Has anybody ever run a business? You cannot run a business and be on social media 24/7. You can't produce 2,000 tweets a day on social media. You can't be at every interview that calls you up. You can't be running four other companies at the exact same time. None of this is making sense, right? So, and they say that Musk is known for his intense work ethic, often sleeping on factory floors or in his office during tough times, and running Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and other ventures simultaneously would push anyone to the edge. And this is what ChatGPT said. And they said, I said, maybe the ketamine is making him emotional. That was my question to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT said, that's an interesting thought. Musk has openly talked about using ketamine to manage depression. He mentioned that he takes it in small, controlled doses under a doctor's supervision. Ketamine can have emotional side effects, including mood swings or heightened emotional sensitivity, especially when combined with extreme stress or sleep deprivation, both things Musk is known for enduring. It is worth noting that Musk's emotional moments, like the ones people have noticed in interviews, could be a mix of the intense pressure he's under, his personal health strategies, including ketamine, and just being human despite his larger than life persona. Elon Musk has recounted a distressing incident from his childhood where, after being severely beaten at school and hospitalized, his father, Errol Musk, who also, by the way, slept with his stepdaughter and had a couple of kids, Errol Musk berated him, calling him worthless and an idiot. This account is detailed in Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk. But it went on to say Elon Musk disputes this version of events, denying that he berated his son following the father disputes the vision. So I went on to say, Chat GPT said, do you think his openness about things like ketamine could change how people view mental health treatments, especially for high performance leaders? And they responded, yeah, Musk definitely has a way of presenting himself that can come across as eccentric or even childlike, sometimes in a playful genius billionaire way, at other times in a more chaotic and predictable manner. Yes, and none of these words speak to a mature, functioning adult, now does it? He mixes big world-changing ideas, Mars colonization, AI, brain chips, with meme humor, bizarre Twitter posts, and public stunts like smoking weed on Joe Rogan's podcast or naming his child X. It's an odd blend of super serious innovation and almost troll-like behavior. The ketamine use, his emotional moments, and his self-deprecating comments, like calling himself tech knocking of Tesla, all add to that image of someone who's brilliant, but also kind of unfiltered. No, I think what it's telling us is this person is a drug addict, but I'll keep reading. And I said, maybe it's showing us his real personality of a drug addict. And ChatGPT said, it's true that Musk's behavior combined with his admission to using ketamine and past moments like smoking weed on Rogan's podcast fuel the perception that he might be reckless or self-destructive. But calling him a drug addict might be an oversimplification. He's been open about using ketamine to manage depression, which some doctors prescribe in controlled doses for that purpose. It's a rising trend among high-stress professionals because ketamine can act fast to relieve certain mood disorders. Still, it's a powerful substance with a risk of addiction if misused, especially outside medical supervision. Musk's erratic behavior, wild tweets, and emotional moments could stem from that, or they could just be part of his intense personality and lifestyle. He's juggling multiple companies and public scrutiny. That would push anyone to the edge. And I said, well, who is he relatable to? And they said, good point. Maybe relatable isn't quite the word. Musk's life is so far from normal that it's hard to imagine anyone truly relating to him. But for some people, his flaws and eccentric behaviors make him seem more human-like. He's not just a billionaire genius, but also someone who struggles, burns out, and makes mistakes. For others, though, his behavior looks more like reckless self-indulgence, especially when he's making huge decisions that affect his companies, employees, and even global industries. It's like he exists in this weird space between visionary innovator and chaotic wildcard. And I made the statement, Musk must be a psychopath. And ChatGPT says, it's definitely tempting to label Musk as something extreme. His behavior is so unconventional that people often see him as either a genius, a madman, or somewhere in between. The word psychopath usually refers to someone with a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and a tendency to pursue goals without regard to others. Musk's actions, like pushing employees to their limits, making ruthless business decisions, or his cold analytical take on big picture issues could fit that image. Yeah, I'd say it does fit that image. I'll keep reading. But at the same time, he has shown moments of vulnerability and emotional investment, especially when talking about his companies, humanity's future, or his personal struggles. That doesn't exactly line up with a textbook definition of psychopathy, which typically involves a lack of genuine emotion. This is absolutely not true. Of course, they can have emotions. Of course, if you call them names online, they're going to feel bad about it. They have the definition all wrong, even on ChatGPT, but I'll keep reading. It's more likely that he's an extreme outlier, a mix of relentless ambition, unconventional thinking, and a personality that doesn't conform to what we expect from leaders. Whether that makes him a hero, villain, or something else entirely depends on how you see his goals and the way he pursues them. Do you think his results, like pushing electric cars and space travel forward, justifies his methods? Or do you feel the way he operates overshadows the good? Well, I stopped the conversation with ChatGPT at that point. I wasn't looking to have a long drawn out convo with ChatGPT, but what's this telling us? Well, they want us to have these perceptions, and people need to get beyond what they're being told as far as perception. And they do this in magazines and all over the place. Like, just go over like the Daily Mail and look at an article, any article, just pick an article about a celebrity. Even the person can be very ugly, horrible looking, horrible, nasty person, they will describe that person as effusive, charming, beautiful. Yeah, so what they do is they use the words in the description to actually kind of overpower what the picture is showing you. So the picture is showing you the reality that they're kind of an ugly monster, right? Not very attractive and all that. But the description says that they're charming, they're intelligent. They always describe themselves as brilliant. That is the key for a good psychopath, right? Their brilliance will always overshadow us little idiots that are always going to be in their way. So let's get going with this little bit more about this Roy Cohn business today. And also Roy Cohn, another interesting character, excuse me, it's not Ray, it's Roy Cohn. He was raised by a mother he was raised by an elite family, okay? They all came from money. So Roy Cohn, he was raised by a mother who everybody considered her so ugly that she could never get a husband. So she literally got the guy she married to because her family had money and he wanted to become a judge. So he was raised and became a gay man lawyer who was raised by a mother who was deemed to be so ugly that no one thought she would ever get married. Yeah, that's behind his personality. So I did a little looking around. The one person that has been talking a lot about Ray Cohn is Whitney Webb. You know, Whitney Webb, another one of the rich elites. Whitney Webb argues that Ray Cohn wasn't just a political fixer and lawyer for powerful figures like Senator Joe McCarthy and Donald Trump. She suggests he was deeply involved in blackmail networks that potentially included child trafficking. In One Nation Under Blackmail, Webb describes how Cohn allegedly ran parties attended by influential people where underage boys were brought in and the events were secretly recorded. The idea was to gather compromising material to control politicians, businessmen, and other key players. This is tied to a broader pattern of intelligence operations, particularly involving the CIA and FBI using blackmail to maintain leverage over people in power. Cohn was connected to figures like J. Edgar Hoover, who himself was rumored to use similar tactics, as well as mobsters such as Anthony Fat Tony Salerno. Whitney Webb outlines how Cohn's activities may have merged organized crime, politics, and intelligence operations, blurring the lines between these worlds. She also draws connections between Cohn's methods and later figures like Jeffrey Epstein, suggesting a continuation of these blackmail networks over decades, though this remains speculative and controversial. Webb paints Cohn as a central figure in a blackmail operation that targeted politicians and influential figures. According to her research, Cohn hosted elaborate parties, bringing in underage boys, and the events were reportedly filmed. The footage, in theory, could then be used to control those caught in compromising situations. She claims this wasn't just Cohn working alone. She ties him to J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the FBI for decades, and mafia families like the Genovese crime family. Cohn's ability to operate above the law, Webb suggests, was due to his deep connections within the intelligence world, where blackmail was seen as a tool for power, not a crime to prosecute. So, within the intelligence world, blackmail was seen as a tool for power, not a crime to prosecute. Webb draws parallels between Cohn and Epstein, noting that both men moved in elite social circles. Cohn had connections to everyone from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump, while Epstein cultivated ties to billionaires and royalty. Appeared untouchable legally, Cohn dodged disbarment for decades despite multiple accusations of wrongdoing. Epstein managed to escape serious punishment even after his first arrest in 2008. They had ties to intelligence. Epstein's alleged ties to intelligence agencies, both U.S. and Israeli, mirror Kahn's rumored role as an asset for Hoover's FBI and possibly the CIA. Excuse me. Webb also mentions Kahn's protege, Roger Stone, who acknowledged learning dirty tricks from Kahn and later became close to Trump, creating a thread of influence that extends into modern politics. One of Webb's more explosive claims is that Epstein may have worked with Israeli intelligence, Mossad, and she speculates that Kahn may have had similar connections, operating at the intersection of organized crime, intelligence, and blackmail. This idea partly comes from Epstein's longtime partner, Ghislaine. So, also, I did some searching into, I've talked in the past about Whitney Webb. Of course, she's one of them, right? WW, flip them on the side. What do you have? 33. Whitney Webb, I'll have more about her little part in all this in a bit here, but you always have to consider the source, right? Because I believe they put their people into these positions like Whitney Webb because they're going to be dodging things, right? They're going to be leaving things out. And so far, maybe I've missed it. Maybe I'm just careless. I don't know. Maybe I'm not up on my game today, but I did a couple searches for Whitney Webb, and I can't find Whitney Webb ever talking about the Ashkenazi Jews. Isn't that amazing? She's going through these books about blackmail. She's talking about the Jews in Chicago. She's talking about them all. Never mentions the Ashkenazi connection. Found that kind of interesting. So, um, anyway, so I asked ChatGPT, I said, did Whitney Webb research Roy Cohn's family history for being Ashkenazi Jews? And ChatGPT said Whitney Webb has extensively researched Roy Cohn's connections to organized crime, intelligence agencies, and blackmail operations. In her article, Hidden in Plain Sight, The Shocking Origins of the Jeffrey Epstein Case, she details Kahn's involvement with figures like Louis Rosenthal and Meyer Lansky, highlighting his role in orchestrating sexual blackmail schemes targeting individuals, influential individuals. However, Webb's investigations do not specifically focus on Roy Cohn's family history or his Ashkenazi Jewish heritage. Her work centers more on his professional associations and activities rather than his personal or familiar background. So, and keep in mind that Whitney Webb, when we first started hearing about her, she was with the Mint Press, right? Well, the Mint Press, I've talked about this in the past. The Mint Press is a CIA funded, or not CIA, but it's funded by John Kerry out of the Chatham House in the UK. So yeah, it is a complete controlled opposition piece, that Mint Press, where Whitney Webb got her start. So let's talk about some of these ties. Lansky, I had to go on a massive watching of mob movies and stuff because I knew all these people's names. I just didn't have them all put together in my head right. But Lansky is a big one. Lansky had close ties to the CIA and U.S. military intelligence. During World War II, Lansky, along with his associate Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, worked with naval intelligence in what was codenamed Operation Underworld, an operation the existence of which the government denied for over 40 years. So I went back and I was looking at other things that where the CIA and them have cooperated with the mob. And this Operation Underworld is a pretty big one. There was a book out, The CIA as Organized Crime, How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World, that the government's cooperation with the mafia during World War II led to its expansion after the war and set the stage for its future collaboration with U.S. intelligence. But I don't think they ever left, okay? Because remember, I've talked about they had right around when World War II was wrapping up, they were over there in Italy with Operation Guido. The CIA was over there. They were doing a lot of stuff over there. So they were collaborating way before World War II. I think around World War II, they got into more, let's say, organizational things because World War II, I think after World War II, they brought in likely, and I'll be coming back with all of this later, but Opus Dei in Spain was running all those kids, right? 300,000 kids. Whoops, just ended up disappearing over in Spain, and that was Opus Dei. So the CIA has always talked about running dual operations. I think what happened was that when they started setting up Opus Dei, they set it up like, oh, just some organization within the Vatican. No, it's a dual operation. There's a group that you see and a group that you don't see. And the group that you don't see are the ones who are likely doing all the trafficking stuff. So anyway, this is going to be a big complex thing, and it's going to take me a while to get through it all. So, um, so anyway, so yeah, they've been cooperating with the mafia ever since. And so also, they knew that in 1951, the mafia was a huge problem. There's a group called the Rockefeller Committee, and I have to get back to them because they had to do with stolen children also. But anyway, so the group called the Rockefeller Committee was formed, and it claimed it was the equivalent to terrorism today. Because now what we're looking at is everybody's a terrorist, right? All this gang stalking business. I'm officially a U.S. terrorist. I mean, not by my own accord. The U.S. government has labeled me, this nice little woman living in Nebraska, as a terrorist. So yeah, so what they started with was um, they say that during World War II had allowed the hoods to insinuate themselves into mainstream America. So in return for services rendered during the war, mafia bosses were protected from prosecution for dozens of unsolved murders. So they go way, way back. So this Rockefeller Committee, it was also a protected branch of the CIA, which was co-opting criminal organizations around the world and using them in its secret war against Soviets and the Red Chinese. So the mafia had cooperated with Uncle Sam, and it had emerged from World War II energized and empowered. They controlled cities around the country at that point. So uh, let me see. There was anyways, they really all interject. I'm going to put this on hold for a minute, take a break here. Because as far as I can tell, the mafia was the one who started with all this photographing of people and stuff. There was a book, Anthony Summers, former BBC journalist and author of the book Official and Confidential: The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover, has argued that it was not Lansky, but William Donovan, the director of the OSS, who obtained the original photos of Hoover and later shared with them Lansky. So yeah, I think the mafia was the one who caught J. Edgar Hoover in compromising positions, so they were able to control him that way. So Summers also stated that to gangster Frank Costello and family and Lansky, the ability to corrupt politicians, policemen, and judges was fundamental to mafia operations. And they said that about Roy Cohn. When he would get a new case, he would say he didn't want to know anything about the case, but he would say, "Who's the judge on the case?" So the way they found to deal with Hoover, according to several mob sources, involved his homosexuality. And Roy Cohn was also homosexual. This anecdote shows that Lansky and the CIA maintained a covert relationship, which included, among other things, the sharing of blackmail material, i.e., intelligence. It is also possible that Hoover was ensnared by the mob during one of Rosenthal's blackmail parties, at which Hoover sometimes found himself in attendance with prominent figures of the mafia. Hoover was said to have worn women's clothing at some of the events, and Meyer, Lansky's wife, later said that her husband had photos of the former FBI director in drag. Furthermore, Hoover is on record showing an unusual concern in the FBI's handling of Rosenthal's criminal links as early as 1939, the same year that his close associate, Lansky, was actively orchestrating the sexual blackmail of powerful political figures. The blackmail acquired on Hoover and the mob's possession of the evidence had been cited as a major factor in Hoover's decades-long denial that excuse me, the blackmail acquired on Hoover and the mob's possession of the evidence has been cited as a major factor in Hoover's decades-long denial that nationwide networks of organized crime were a serious issue. Hoover asserted that it was a decentralized, local issue and therefore outside of the Bureau's jurisdiction. By the time Hoover finally acknowledged the existence of a national organized crime network, listen up, when do you think he announced this? Well, if you guessed 1963. So, by the time Hoover finally acknowledged the existence of national organized crime networks in 1963, they were so entrenched in the U.S. establishment that they were untouchable. And I will also be showing you, either today or in future shows, exactly how our good Moroccan mafia people over there in Belgium, they got the same deal going. Gee, nobody noticed they were over there in Belgium making it a big cocaine and prostitution and trafficking route. Gee, nobody noticed any of that stuff over there in Belgium, just like nobody noticed anything in the United States. But there's a bigger picture of this. What happened really was that they used the prohibition. Prohibition was a gift to the mafia. So they had prohibition, they had all this stuff going on up until 1963 when they decided to take a little peek at the mafia, right? Why do I always keep saying it's a game of omission, right? Just like they allowed hotels to rape children, transport people, and all this sex trafficking because, oh, well, we couldn't enforce the laws, right? Funny how that always happens. So this person, congressional crime consultant Ralph Salerno, told Summers in 1993 that Hoover's willful ignorance of organized crime for most of his career as FBI director allowed organized crime to grow very strong in economic and political terms so that it became a much bigger threat to the well-being of this country than it would have been had it been addressed much sooner. Imagine this. I'm sure that you're probably sitting there just shocked as I am, just slapping your head going, oh my God, how did this ever happen? Hoover didn't know about the mafia for all those years? Huh. So I'm going to put this on break for a second here. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert two clips, excuse me, because Roy, I got to call him Roy was involved first with the Rosenbergs, okay, the people that were supposedly gave away the atom bomb secrets. And, but the first clip is from 60 Minutes, and it's a really good clip about Roy Cohn. I looked through hundreds of clips, and this one really encapsulates it all. And it talks about just a little bit more of the background of Roy Cohn. And then the next clip is going to talk about the Rosenbergs. It's called Executed for Espionage. I think the Rosenberg case was a true case. They had two sons who were just treated horribly. When the Rosenbergs got hauled off to jail and stuff, and it'll make more sense after you hear the clips. But after they got hauled off to jail, those poor two boys, they got hauled off to like orphanages and stuff like that, and nobody wanted those kids because their parents were spies and stuff, and really horrible. But they did go through their parents' paperwork, and I think the father was definitely doing some spying work, but I don't think the mother was involved. So let's go ahead and just play those clips now. Oh, I forgot to tell you what I have down for you below. Let me see here. I have a lot of links for you down below. Let me see what they are. Okay. I have several clips you might want to take a look at. There was a book that Mary Trump wrote. Mary Trump is the daughter of Fred Trump. Fred Trump was supposed to take over the Trump family, but then he became an alcoholic because he didn't go along with the family motto of money and greed. So Mary wrote a book called Who Could Ever Love You by Mary Trump. She also has a YouTube channel. Also, I found a really good art, a few documentaries you want to take a look at. Trump's 40-year entanglement with the FBI and organized crime. Hidden in Plain Sight, The Shocking Origins of the Jeffrey Epstein Case. That was the one from Whitney Webb. And then some other Tesla ones. So the Rosenbergs, their children were adopted, and their new name is Meropol, Meropol. So when you see that name, that's the Rosenbergs' kids because they got adopted by somebody else. And then I have a couple articles about and a couple shows about Donald Trump's shocking relation with Roy Cohn. Where's my Roy Cohn? There's been a few movies about him. A new movie is out, The Apprentice. Bully, Coward, Victim, The Story of Roy Cohn, Donald Trump, the Mafia, blah, blah, blah. I updated a page over my website about Iraq. Iraq shows us the final horror of all this plutonium. Iraq has had their soil examined, and Iraq is the home now of some very, very sad cases of children over there now. It's the end result because listen, this is the way it happened. They couldn't really say, "Hey, we want to develop this plutonium because they want to destroy all of you people's DNA." They had to come up with a reason, right? And the reason was, let's go to war, right? And the reason was, let's make it nuclear so it's big and scary, nobody knows what it is, and blah blah blah. We can throw that fear everywhere. Because the real intent was for what's going on right now in this end stage. They want that plutonium to pump into our homes. That is the 100% the reason for why these wars, why all of this. So I put it together all in one page, and you can see the horrible damage that's going on in Iraq right now with the children being born. So yes, plutonium is the best way to destroy our DNA, and that is exactly why it's going on. So if you're interested, I have a web page I put up. It's called Iraq Plutonium and DNA Destruction. And it's a pretty hard page to look at. Look at those poor children. But yeah, so I pulled together the whole thing into that one page so you can go take a look. And I've got to close off right now. So the clips will play right now, and I will be back on the other side.
60 Minutes Rewind.
Here's how to cause a fuss at a gathering of American judges or lawyers or just thoughtful people. Merely say the name Roy Cohn. People will leap at you with allegations against the man going back to his association with Joe McCarthy. Some sheer invention, some true but unprovable, and a lot that's true and proven. Among the current allegations, that it was Roy Cohn who started the rumor that Hamilton Jordan used cocaine at the Studio 54 disco. He denies he started it. That Cohn is the secret beneficiary of a number of dubious cash-only businesses. Cohn denies it. You will get very few people to praise or even defend Roy Cohn. Many, if not most, regard him as something of a snake. Let's take a look.
The committee will come to order.
The Roy Cohn of 1954. The arrogant young man always at Joe McCarthy's ear. McCarthy was impressed by Cohn's work in helping to send the Rosenbergs to the electric chair on the charge of spying for Russia. Roy Cohn, one of the authors of McCarthyism.
One thing I've always admired Senator McCarthy for was the fact that he was one of the few people I've ever run across in Washington who had guts, and the guts to stand up for what he believed in, and didn't care about the gentlemanly fellow senator rules and all of that hogwash. He cared about this country. I cared about this country.
When McCarthy and McCarthyism died, a lot of people thought it spelled the end of Roy Cohn, the brash New York lawyer, destroyer of reputations, whose venom had no limit, was washed up, finished. Not so. Today, the rich and the powerful and famous seek him out for the biggest of big money lawsuits. Benson Ford, for example, who is suing his Uncle Henry for scores of millions.
I hired Roy Cohn because he is a tough son of a bitch.
If I can compare this with a Western, it's like bringing in a hired gun.
That's right. Because It seems like in Michigan, seems to be Henry Ford's town, his word is very strong and his image is very popular back there. And I wanted to get a good street fighter in there to take away that image and break it down and clean it up a little bit.
It isn't a gentleman's fight, is it?
It ain't gonna be a gentleman's fight, Wally, not this one.
Don't mess with Roy Cohn has become a motto Roy wears with pride. The man who wrote the Esquire cover story, Ken Oletta, is a reporter who regularly measures Roy Cohn's impact on politics, business, and the law.
People come to him because, as I called him in that piece, they think of him as a legal executioner. A husband or a wife goes to Roy because they want to kill, all legal, their mate. Or a business partner, or former business partner, goes to Roy because they want to get back at a former associate. Or Benson Ford goes to Roy because he wants to get back at his uncle. And it's all legal.
I want to be prepared to the teeth. If I have a witness on a stand for an adversary, I want to know everything about that witness from the year one, every application he filed for a driver's license, to show inconsistencies, to show tendencies which demonstrate lack of credibility, and I want to be armed to the teeth. I don't go for this theory that my magnetic personality or my toughness is going to win over a jury or a judge.
He believes that it's war, and that outside of his small circle of friends, he inhabits the jungle. And all of these forces out there, be they the federal government or the U.S. Attorney's Office or journalists or others, are out to get him.
One man who was out to get him was another young, some might say arrogant lawyer attracted to Joe McCarthy, Robert Kennedy. Roy and Bobby served the senator loyally, but neither man could bear the presence of the other.
I don't know why Bobby and I never hit it off together. There could have been, one reason could have been, he wanted the job of chief counsel, which I got.
But the vendetta continued.
Well, there's no question about it. I think the authority for that, Morley, is one of his assistants, a man named Irving Younger, now a law professor at Cornell, wrote an article for commentary a couple of years ago.
Admitting it.
Oh, yes. He had been called in by the United States Attorney in the presence of Attorney General Kennedy and said the Justice Department wants to get Roy Cohn. It's your job to get him and report to us.
Why?
He didn't like me.
You cannot hurt Roy Cohn. He's just invulnerable because he recognizes that the more publicity he gets, no matter what the publicity is, he benefits.
I would do anything that is legally permissible to do to get my client to win. Yes, I would. That's my job. There isn't anything I would not do because I believe there's only one answer in an adversary profession like law, and that is winning.
It's that attitude that brings in the clients.
If we make what I feel is a reasonable work out of everything, okay. If we don't make a reasonable work out of everything, I fight all the way.
You fight all the way, but I leave everything in your hands because you know what the article says. You never mess with Roy Cohn.
As long as a few people believe it.
If you hang out in Cohn's office, you get a taste of the kind of clients he gets and the reason they come to him. A lady who feels she got the wrong end of a business deal. Benson Ford and his millions, and this grandfatherly man.
Sit down.
I'm gonna leave in the morning. I'm going to the country.
Good. What are you going to do when you get to the country?
Well, I mean, I planted peppers last week. Now I'm going to plant tomatoes.
His name is Carmine Galante, the late Carmine Galante, who the papers said was the godfather of the Mafia.
You think that had an influence on the federal judge when he held that you were right and the parole commission was wrong?
I think so.
He thinks a farmer ought to be able to seed, right?
I think so. I mean, it's very well known that that's what I do.
A few months after this meeting, he was gunned down as he sipped a glass of wine. And to law students who object to Cohn's defense of underworld clients, he offers no apologies.
I don't have to believe a person is innocent, like we keep talking about Galante or Tony Salerno or something like that. I don't have to believe in their innocence in a particular case. I have to believe one of two things. Number one, that that person is innocent in the particular case, or that there are some extraordinary circumstances which make the prosecution unfair.
Roy Cohn's had his own troubles with the law. He's been tried 3 times on criminal charges that could have put him away for years. But he was acquitted each time. That's helped his reputation that if you're in trouble, Get Roy Cohn. The client is an Italian countess. She gets the royal treatment at a smart New York restaurant and a ride in Cohn's Rolls Royce. The lunch is a business deduction, and so is the rolls.
It's interesting and ironic because that is the criticism he makes of Henry Ford, that Henry Ford is using corporate funds for his personal use. What Roy does, he lives off an expense allowance estimated between $300,000 and $400,000 a year. All of it charged to the business on the theory that he is conducting business all the time. I think that's very questionable.
Roy Cohn manages to spend, I guess, $500,000 a year as expenses without paying a penny of tax on it.
When we talk expenses, now that isn't so. First of all, I have paid an astronomical amount of taxes. I guarantee you I have paid more taxes than any of the last 3 presidents of the United States added up together. I probably hold the world's record of never having had a completed audit by Internal Revenue Service for over 20 years. I'm supposed to remember now, in 1979, who I had dinner with in February 1958. I very frankly don't want to earn any more than I have to earn to subsist the way I want to subsist, because I don't like the way this country punishes the workers, the middle class, the blue-collar people, the white-collar people, middle America. I think it's lousy.
There are people who think that Roy Cohn's takeovers are lousy. They say there's a pattern in which Cohn takes on a client and then somehow ends up as the beneficiary of that client's business assets.
As far as businesses are concerned now, I'll tell you one thing. I have no interest in business of any kind. I don't have an interest in any businesses. I'm interested in practicing law. I don't want assets. I don't have a family. I don't need assets.
For a man without assets, Roy lives quite well in a grand New York townhouse whose ownership is unclear, a house that also houses his law firm, a law firm in which he is not even named as a partner, all of which may be helpful in getting around certain tax obligations. Despite Cohn's reputation as being invincible, he has lost a number of cases. It's just that he always makes them sound like victories.
He recognizes that if you are tenacious, if you are a killer, if you are willing to go to any length to make your point or appeal your case, most people are going to back off.
In the musical Pal Joey, the song goes, "A canopy bed has lots of class, and so does a ceiling made of glass." Cohn has them both in his ornate bedroom, which is also a kind of recreation room and office and gallery for his collection of frogs, stuffed frogs, china frogs, and toy soldiers. He admits to a certain vanity, religious about doing his 200 sit-ups every day. All this while dictating to his male secretary, Vincent Millard.
Did you remember I had a lunch date with Barbara Walters?
When is that?
Today.
Cohn maintains a permanent, expensive tan. In the harsh months, he somehow finds a business reason to head for Acapulco or Hawaii. He's a familiar figure in the best restaurants and tailors and barbershops, and regularly gets the works in places like the Beverly Hills Hotel. He is a sybarite who manages to take his pleasures with at least one ear tuned to business.
Somebody have a pencil?
Cohn has no small talk. He'll tell you unrepeatable gossip about his enemies, and he will praise his friends. The rest is just business.
The story will continue after this.
It is always business when he visits Studio 54, that over-publicized disco parlor in New York. Here gather the hip and the old and the odd. Any night, it is the mob scene from a Fellini movie. Cohn may look and feel uncomfortable in this goofy setting, but he goes. Lately, he goes because the owners of the place are his clients, and they've pleaded guilty to income tax evasion. Federal authorities say they've skimmed millions in cash from the place. They'll be sentenced next month. Cohn also goes because he likes to be seen with this week's jet set. Once in a while, he'll escort a model, but New York's matchmakers have given up on it. He's just not the marrying kind. Though at one time he says he and Barbara Walters almost got married. Barbara won't comment except to praise Roy for his loyalty.
We're getting married when we're both 60. Although I must say, in fairness to her, she disagrees with me politically like about 100%, because she's far more liberal than I am in practically every area.
Why haven't you gotten married?
I always felt that being a controversial person and being a person that people are always going to be fighting about and over and always destined to be always in some kind of battle or other, that I could go through it better if all I had to worry about was myself, not a wife and kids who were going to have part of the heartache pushed over on them.
Roy Cohn came to law with good connections. His father was a gentle-mannered New York State judge, and young Roy met all the right people.
When I went down as chief counsel for the McCarthy Committee, I totally broke with my own background, with my own past. In other words, here I was, a young Jewish Democrat from New York, supposedly the most liberal, or one of the most liberal cities in the United States, going down to become chief counsel for a fellow like Joe McCarthy.
To what extent was Roy Cohn, the Jewish lawyer from New York, gonna out to prove that he was as good an American as any Irish Catholic or WASP lawyer?
I buy your thought, and I think there is something to it, but the script was a little bit different than that. I did resent very much the idea of associating Jews with a sympathy toward communism. And I do admit the fact that this is something that has always bothered me, and I've tried in every way I can to make it clear that the fact my name is Cohn and the fact that my religion has nothing to do except perfect compatibility with my love for America and my dislike for communism.
In the mosaic of New York politics, Roy Cohn is all things to all men. This registered Democrat feels perfectly at home at the East Side Conservative Club. He drifts through a crowd of well-wishers who might fear him or admire him, or might feel that one day they'll need him. It's hard to say how much political influence he has, but a lot of people believe he has it, and that can be enough. It's all very New York. The Irish bagpipes of the very Irish New York City detective band serenade the Jewish lawyer and his good buddy, the Cardinal's representative.
But how did this man bounce back and become so respectable? Roy, oddly enough, benefited from a kind of an innocence by association. He developed, and throughout his boyhood, he had close friends. And he went to their parties all the time. And people would see Roy, this pariah in the corner, and others would, Ed Weisel, Cyrus Vance, others would be talking to him. So they came to feel, well, he can't be that bad.
I don't think it was a question of pulling anything off. I've tried to give loyalty and I've tried to give friendship, and I find in life, when you extend friendship and you extend loyalty, you get it back.
We've seen Roy Cohn twice. What have we seen? A person of great charm, intellect, misstatement, accomplishment, and hypocrisy.
Do not be deceived. Regard this as a friendly introduction of Cohn at New York Law School. Professor Bob Blecker prepares his students for a series of Roy Cohn lectures.
Mr. Cohn is a person who thinks very little of truth, but much of genuineness. He's a master of deception, and yet a detester of ceremony. A nice guy who's done and does some lousy things. A protector, a paladin, a friend in court of organized crime.
Roy Cohn is not an enigma. He's simply a man who is seen differently by different people. If you engaged in amateur analysis, you might say that Roy Cohn was the kid on the block that all the bullies beat up on. And so when Roy Marcus Cohn was growing up, he was determined to get rich and get even. And he has.
Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today's script was handled by Ben Adelman. So be sure to show him some love in the comments as you deploy your likes, subscribe, and ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. Let's get to it. For those of us who weren't alive during the Cold War, it is difficult to understand the unique climate of fear and suspicion that seemed to pervade all of America in the first decade after the end of World War II in 1945. The Soviet Union emerged from the war as a world power, seemingly ideologically opposed to everything the US and its allies stood for, and just as determined to influence the course of world events. A conflict between them seemed inevitable, but when the USSR developed their first atomic bomb in 1949, it raised the terrifying possibility of a war between them leading to the complete destruction of civilization itself. As a result, both sides turned to more covert means to gain an edge on each other, including espionage. When Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were arrested in 1950, accused of being the ringleaders of a Soviet spy ring in the US, it confirmed many Americans' worst fears, that American citizens were so devoted to the philosophy of communism that they would betray their country to do so. The response of the American justice system was swift and unmerciful. The couple was duly convicted of espionage in federal court, and 3 years later they were executed for their crimes in the electric chair. For many, that was the end of the story. They patted themselves on the back for a job well done. The country had been saved from the menace of Soviet spies. But as the years passed and the Red Scare died down, people began asking questions about the Rosenberg case. A review of documents pertaining to the investigation and trial revealed a litany of malfeasance, dirty dealing, and outright deception on the part of people who prosecuted and executed the Rosenbergs, leading to speculation that they had been framed. It certainly raised questions about whether they deserved to die for what they'd supposedly done. After all, they were the only people in the entire Cold War period who were executed for espionage in the United States. The tale of the Rosenbergs is a classic case of what can go wrong when people adopt the philosophy the ends justify the means. It is a story without heroes on either side, a potent mix of villains and victims, of idealism mixed with blatant self-interest. The end result was the destruction of an entire family, the orphaning of 2 small children, and a lot of questions about whether it is acceptable to deny civil rights to a group of American citizens because of their actions, or worse, simply because of their political beliefs. Both Ethel Greenglass, who was born in 1915, and Julius Rosenberg, born 3 years later, came from similar unremarkable backgrounds. Both came from working-class Jewish families who immigrated to New York City from Eastern Europe to escape the crushing poverty and horrific anti-Semitism that were widespread at the time. Both were clearly intelligent, doing well in school. Julius studied electrical engineering at City College of New York, CCNY, and Ethel would have done well at college too, had she been allowed to attend. Her mother, Tessie, believed that the only proper role for her daughter was to marry a Jewish man and bear his children, and both were politically active in left-wing causes in the 1930s, growing attached to the philosophy of communism that was being espoused by the Soviet Union. They were by no means the only people in America who were, mind you. The political philosophies of Marx and Lenin were popular among New York's Jewish community, particularly those who were well educated, and it isn't hard to see why. A utopian world where distinctions of social class, race, and religious prejudices and wealth inequality all vanished was an attractive one, particularly among those who had to overcome hardships like childhood poverty, bigotry against Jews, and the massive reduction in jobs caused by the Great Depression. The draconian means by which Joseph Stalin was transforming his country into a socialist paradise was largely hidden from the outside world, allowing people to look at it through rose-colored glasses. Julius and Ethel met in 1936 and quickly became inseparable. Their similar backgrounds, intellectual capabilities, and interest in left-wing politics complemented each other perfectly, and it didn't take them long to fall deeply in love with each other. They wanted to get married almost immediately, but the Rosenbergs wanted their son to finish college first. Their wedding was held in June 1939, not long after Julius, known to his friends and family as Julie, had received his diploma. Julius took a job with the U.S. Army Signal Corps in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, as an engineer, an essential occupation that exempted him from the draft when the U.S. entered World War II in December 1941. From the outside, the Rosenbergs appeared to be a classic example of a successful American family. Julius had a good-paying job while Ethel stayed home to look after the couple's two sons, Michael, born in 1943, and Robert, born in 1947. It was a peaceful life that wasn't to last. In order to secure the job with the Signal Corps, Julius Rosenberg had to lie on the application, claiming to have never been a member of the Communist Party, which he was. Investigated and cleared in 1941 by the FBI, his past activities came back to haunt him in January 1945, when he was fired from the Signal Corps as a potential security risk. The US government didn't know it at the time, but it was already too late. It has been established that Julius Rosenberg had been acting as a spy for the Soviet Union since at least 1942, passing on classified technical information from his workplace to his handlers, who were agents of the NKVD posing as Soviet diplomats. What's more, he was actively recruiting others into his spy ring, including his wife's brother, David Greenglass, a soldier who was stationed at Los Alamos, where the top-secret project to develop the atomic bomb was being worked on. Greenglass was not an engineer, and so the information he delivered to his brother-in-law to pass on to his Soviet handlers was rudimentary at best, since he didn't understand the complex physics that went into the creation of the bomb. Other spies recruited by Julius included 3 college classmates of his, Morton Sobel, William Pearl, and Joel Barr, all engineers who passed on information about the defense projects they were working on. Rosenberg hardly took any money from his Soviet contracts for his work. He was instead motivated by his sincere belief that advancing the cause of world socialism was the right thing to do. After the war ended, the Rosenbergs struggled to make ends meet. There were no more government jobs on offer after Julius was fired by the Signal Corps, and when he went into business for himself with a machine shop, it quickly floundered. He also had no more classified information to pass on to the Soviets, so his spy ring also dried up. This must have been a double blow for Julius, no longer able to provide for his family or to engage in the cause that had consumed his life. But at least he could take solace in the fact that he hadn't been caught. But that too wasn't to last. In the summer of 1949, the American government was alarmed to discover that the Soviets had detonated their first atomic bomb, years ahead of when they were expected to. For many, including FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, the only explanation for this premature end to America's nuclear monopoly was that spies had passed on American nuclear secrets to the Soviets. But what started out as a hunt for spies quickly descended into hysteria. Things began to unravel for the Rosenbergs in February 1950, when the German-born British scientist Klaus Fuchs was arrested by MI5. Fuchs was a physicist who had been intimately involved with the Manhattan Project, but he was also a Soviet spy who'd been passing on information on what he and his colleagues were working on throughout the war. He soon confessed as much to his interrogators, and the authorities on both sides of the Atlantic began a hunt to round up Fuchs's associates. First to be arrested was Fuchs's courier, a man named Harry Gold. Gold in turn implicated David Greenglass as another spy who he collected information from. Greenglass was arrested in June 1950, and he too confessed to his involvement. There were also indications that David's wife, Ruth, was also in the FBI's crosshairs. After consulting with his lawyers and his family, David decided the best way to save himself and his wife was to help the FBI convict somebody else, namely his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg. Julius was arrested in July, but unlike the others that had been implicated in the net so far, he refused to talk, refused to confess, or to implicate others. The FBI searched around for anything they could leverage against Rosenberg to get him to cooperate, just as they had successfully done with David and Ruth Greenglass. When threats to impose the death penalty didn't work, their next tactic was to threaten to prosecute Ethel Rosenberg, hoping that he'd cooperate to save his wife. But that didn't work either. Perhaps Julius knew, as well as the FBI did, that there was no evidence to charge Ethel with. Nevertheless, after testifying before a grand jury on 2 separate occasions in connection with her husband and brother's cases, Ethel was arrested in August 1950. To better explain, but not to justify what happened next, it's important to understand the geopolitical situation America found itself in at this point in time. The entire country was in a panic over the seemingly unstoppable march of communism all over the globe. The US and her allies had just ended a 15-month-long standoff with the Soviet Union over the fate of West Berlin, narrowly avoiding war. Mao Zedong had won the Chinese Civil War in October 1949, putting one of the largest nations in the world under a communist government. Mere weeks before the Rosenbergs were arrested, North Korea launched an invasion of its southern neighbor, triggering the Korean War. And to top it all off, now the Soviets had the bomb. Any full-scale confrontation between the 2 superpowers, which many people believed to be inevitable, would now involve nuclear weapons, with all the wholesale destruction that came with it. The American public, whipped into a frenzy by reactionaries like FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover and Senator Joseph McCarthy, demanded strong action against communists both at home and abroad. The government was under enormous pressure to act, and the Rosenbergs came into their crosshairs at the exact wrong moment. For them, anyway. The trial against Julius and Ethel Rosenberg began on March 6, 1951. The prosecution's case rested on the testimony of David and Ruth Greenglass, who testified under oath that both Julius and Ethel were involved in espionage activities. This was a marked change from their earlier testimony, when they said that only Julius had participated and that Ethel had not. 50 years later, in 2001, David Greenglass would admit in an interview that he'd lied at the Rosenberg trial about Ethel's involvement, that he'd been persuaded to change his testimony by the authorities in exchange for clemency for himself and his wife, and that he, by the way, didn't care. "My wife was more important than my sister," he said, also stating that he didn't believe that they'd sentence her to death. Julius and Ethel didn't receive any support from the rest of the Greenglass family either, including from Ethel's mother, Tessie, who was quoted describing her own daughter as a soldier of Stalin, and that she had betrayed the United States their family so dearly loved. She did not have such harsh words for her son David, however, who was given a 15-year prison sentence for his role in the spy ring, being released in 1960. The prosecutorial misconduct in the Rosenberg case went beyond merely encouraging the Greenglasses to betray their own family, however. The presiding judge, Irving Kaufman, had pulled a number of favors in order to be assigned to the trial, hoping to use the notoriety it garnered as a springboard to higher office. He made no secret of his desire to one day sit on the U.S. Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Chief Prosecutor Irving Saple's deputy was 23-year-old Roy Cohn, an unscrupulous and ambitious character who was determined to win the case no matter the cost to further his own ambitions. According to Cohn, he had a number of private conversations with Judge Kaufman about the case throughout the trial, a highly unethical practice because the presiding judge is supposed to be impartial. That alone would have been grounds for a mistrial had it come out at the time. It had also been Cohn who had persuaded David Greenglass to change his testimony to incriminate his sister at their trial. With the deck stacked as it was, the Rosenbergs stood little chance of getting an acquittal. Their attorney, Emanuel Bloch, was passionate, but he was a civil attorney who had little experience with criminal cases. He made a number of mistakes during the trial that later legal experts would point out may have contributed to the Rosenbergs' conviction. Julius and Ethel didn't exactly help themselves during their testimony either, repeatedly pleading the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination to avoid answering questions asked by the prosecutor, which even today makes people believe that the witness has something to hide and must be guilty. The Rosenbergs were both convicted of all charges against them. When it came time to pronounce sentence on them, Judge Kaufman dropped the hammer. Declaring that their crimes had been worse than murder, Kaufman claimed that the Rosenbergs were to blame for the Korean War because of their delivery of the atomic bomb to the Soviets, and that all the casualties that had been sustained was thus on their heads, an assertion that most people found ludicrous even at the time. He sentenced both of them to death in the electric chair, a harsher sentence than even J. Edgar Hoover wanted. Particularly for Ethel, they wanted the Rosenbergs to name names, not to die. Hoover also worried that it would make the US government look bad to execute a young mother. For the next 2 years, Julius and Ethel sat on Sing Sing Prison's death row while their appeals worked their way through the legal system. Manny Block and other attorneys pulled out all the stops to gain clemency for their clients, appealing all the way to the Supreme Court and to President Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. But everywhere they turned, they were rebuffed. No one could find anything wrong with how the trial had taken place. The irregularities would not be exposed until much later. And no one wanted to go against the prevailing public opinion that the Rosenbergs should fry. Overriding everything was a blinding fear of communism, which reached its zenith in the years after the Rosenbergs' conviction in the Red Scare, when thousands of people were harassed, investigated, prosecuted, or publicly humiliated and fired from their jobs because of suspected communist sympathies. Roy Cohn was right in the middle of this effort, serving as Senator McCarthy's right-hand man, trying to prove that communists had infiltrated every level of the US government in order to bring down the country from within. All of this fear and panic shouted down the people who believed that the Rosenbergs had been railroaded, or that the sentence imposed on them was too harsh. Protests at embassies around the world and in front of the White House were ignored. On June 19, 1953, first Julius, then Ethel were led out of their cells and executed in Sing Sing's electric chair. She was 37 and he was 35. More than 10,000 people turned out for their funeral in Brooklyn and burial in a Long Island Jewish cemetery. The question remained, what should become of the Rosenbergs' two sons, Michael and Robert, who were 10 and 6 when their parents died? All of their relatives refused to take them in, claiming that they were ill-equipped to do so, but more likely trying to distance themselves from the infamy of raising two convicted spies' children. The boys received hate mail at their foster home, with one letter writer demanding that they change their names and become Christians, hinting at an odious undercurrent of anti-Semitism that pervaded throughout the affair, that American Jews were inherently disloyal. Eventually, the boys were adopted by the Mirapol family and took their surname as a way to allow them to grow up out from under the shadow of the Rosenberg case. The Rosenberg case has been controversial almost since the moment the trial was over. Many argued that the Rosenbergs had been innocent and were framed by their relatives and by the government. Others thought them guilty but believed the sentence was too harsh. The Rosenbergs were the only two people executed for espionage in America during the whole course of the Cold War. Michael and Robert Mirapol have been trying since the 1970s to exonerate their parents, and even as recently as September 2024, have petitioned the government for documents pertaining to the case. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the 1990s ushered in a period of retrospection about what the US had done during the previous 4 decades. In this light, the Rosenberg case has been reevaluated. New information has come to light. Decrypted Soviet diplomatic cables during World War II that were kept secret by the US government until 1995 show that Julius Rosenberg was a Soviet spy, passing on military and technical secrets, though as to the allegation that he was chiefly responsible for delivering the secrets of the atomic bomb to the Soviets, most historians find that incredulous. The material provided by Klaus Fuchs was far more damning than anything the Rosenberg spy ring offered up. In any case, his sentence for what he had done was far harsher than for other convicted spies. Aldrich Ames, a CIA analyst known as one of the most compromising Soviet spies in US history, received a life sentence for crimes considered much worse than what Julius Rosenberg had done. The case of Ethel Rosenberg is particularly tragic. The same records that show Julius was a spy also show that Ethel was not an active participant in his activities, and that the testimony from David and Ruth Greenglass that said she was had been a lie. Records of meetings from high-level Justice Department officials showed that they all knew the case against her was shaky at best, but they all felt they needed to put her on trial in order to pressure Julius into flipping for them. The problem was Julius didn't do what he was supposed to, and Ethel never made any appeals to save herself either, essentially calling the government's bluff and daring them to actually execute them. Despite numerous appeals from her children and from others, Ethel's conviction still remains on the books to this day, and it seems unlikely that's going to change anytime soon. Many of those who contributed to the death of the Rosenbergs met ignominious ends themselves. Irving Sapol died in 1977 under a cloud of suspicion involving allegations of bribery and corruption, while Roy Cohn, who has become one of the most infamous names in American history, died of AIDS in 1986, having been recently disbarred after one too many ethics violations. As for Judge Kaufman, he never made it onto the Supreme Court, and when he died in 1992, his long legal career was overshadowed by the cloud that came with sentencing the Rosenbergs to death. Today, it is hard to imagine a case like the Rosenbergs playing out similarly in America. There are far more eyeballs in the operation of the justice system, supposedly to prevent abuses from happening, after all. But the truth is, when faced with a supposedly existential threat, it is too easy to put aside the rule of law in order to keep the community quote-unquote safe. It is the same impulse that drove the US government to detain Japanese Americans in internment camps during World War II, and to detain suspected terrorists without trial in places like Guantanamo Bay, and torture them for information in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. One can only hope that, if a similar instance crops up in the future, that those in charge will remember the Rosenbergs to prevent a similar miscarriage of justice from happening again. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment who you think we should cover next from the Cold War era, subscribe to the channel and ring that bell if you haven't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about historical figures. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, I'm back. So let's talk a little bit more about the Don. So the Don and how he connects to the mafia. Well, it all got started around the 1800s, is about the time I've been talking about, around that Gilded Age, right? Roy Cohn is an interesting man. He's the one who they said his mother was too ugly to get married. If you look at pictures of his face, and now remember, I'm not trying to be cruel, but he has a very odd looking face, okay? And I looked for the reason because I like odd details, right? I think what might have happened was he had a botched facelift. I'm trying to get my face in the right direction. It looks like, well, anyway, I can't get the right direction. But anyway, so it looked like he had a botched face job on one side of his face. But he never, it was speculated, but he never admitted it. But he didn't admit a lot of stuff, right? And he was famous for his, what I've been talking about, the Psychopath playbook, which means never apologize, never back down. And what you do is you attack them with everything that you're really doing and put the blame all on them. So yeah, he really was very skilled in that. But so I'll give you a little example about how Donald Trump, or the Don, works with the mafia. Kind of interesting story because, years ago, all of a sudden the Don was investing in casinos, right? Well, what was that all about? Well, nothing is quite like how it looks, right? So let me tell you first, before I tell you who was behind it, let me tell you what Wikipedia says. Resorts International. Resorts International was a hotel and casino company from its origins as a paint company. It moved into the resort business in the late 1960s with the development of Paradise Island in the Bahamas, and then expanded to Atlantic City, New Jersey, with the opening of Resorts Casino Hotel in 1978. And you thought, well, wait a minute here. Why was a company that was a paint company getting into the resort business? Well, that gets part of the interesting story here. So, after the death of its longtime chairman, James Crosby, in 1986, the company was briefly controlled by Donald Trump before being acquired by Merv Griffin in 1988. It was acquired by Sun International in 1996. So in 1958, the Mary Carter Paint Company, a New Jersey paint manufacturer, was acquired by a group of investors. James Crosby, son of one of the investors, was appointed to lead the company. With its paint business on the decline, Mary Carter sought to diversify into the land development business. So it has started acquiring land. Well, okay, that's what the Wikipedia story says. So let's go over here and take a look at what the real story is. Resorts International, there was an article, October 30th, 1978. It says Resorts International was established and controlled by frontmen for the Rockefeller and Rothschild families and their enforcers in the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, and its allied intelligence agency, Israel's Mossad. So, Resorts International was founded by the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, right? Okay, so where does President Trump fit into this picture? To find the answer, one must turn to the murky origins of Resorts International, and this is where the story gets very, very interesting. Resorts International evolved from a CIA front company set up in the early 1950s by then CIA Director Alan Dulles and his close associate, three-term New York Governor Thomas E. Dewey, political functionary in the so-called Rockefeller Republican wing of the GOP. The front company in question was the innocuously named Mary Carter Paint Company, which operated a national chain of paint stores but was set up to function as a covert CIA money laundering operation. In 1958 to 59, Dewey and a number of associates used a reported $2 million in CIA funds to buy a controlling interest in the Crosby Miller Corporation, headed by Dewey friend James Crosby, which was then merged with Mary Carter. Among other things, the new corporation laundered CIA money for arming the anti-Castro Cuban exiles. The company also launched into lucrative casino gambling enterprises in the Caribbean, where the CIA was quite active during that period, having engaged the Lansky crime syndicate in now thoroughly documented and widely known plots to topple Fidel Castro, who had enraged the mob by closing down Cuban gambling enterprises. Thus, it should be no surprise that in 1963, Alvin Malnick, Malnik, a top henchman of crime syndicate boss Meyer Lansky, was found to be closely connected to the operations of Mary Carter Paint. In 1963, Mary Carter Paint spun off its paint division and during the next several years began developing its casino operations, particularly in the Bahamas. In 1967 to 68, Mary Carter Paint officially changed its name to Resorts International and began massive international expansion. This article from the Spotlight determined that several principal investors provided the funds and assets for the venture. Well, let's see who they were. Number one, Meyer Lansky, the acknowledged chairman of the board and chief financier of the underworld gambling syndicate, who maintained his own long-standing ties to not only Israel and the Mossad, but also the CIA and the American intelligence community. David Rockefeller, head of the Rockefeller financial empire, who provided his company's clout and CIA and global banking connections to assist in the operation. The Investors Overseas Service, or IOS, then the world's largest flight capital conglomerate, controlling assets worth $2.5 billion. Also involved was Tibor Rosenbaum, who was not only Mossad's Swiss-based chief financier behind covert arms deals, but also the head of the Banque de Credit International of Geneva, the Lansky Syndicate's chief European money launderer, and Baron Edward de Rothschild of the European banking family and a personal business partner of Rosenbaum in Rosenbaum's Mossad-related ventures ranging far and wide. And lastly, William Mellon Hitchcock, one of the heirs to the Mellon family fortune, one of America's largest private family fortunes, which for many years has also maintained close ties with the CIA. Resorts International expanded by leaps and bounds and soon became one of the most profitable of all the gambling enterprises. And by 1970, the underworld figures who were running the casinos in league with their behind-the-scene partners began moving to expand casino gambling in the United States. Mob Chief Lansky called a high-level meeting of gambling syndicate figures in Acapulco, Mexico, and there they assembled mobsters pinpointed the fading resort of Atlantic City as their first new target. I was in Atlantic City around the 80s. I was there for a convention, and I got to tell you, it was a trash pit. I'm talking a trash pit. One block off of where all the big fancy casinos were was just the worst poverty you'd ever want to stumble into in your life. It was I would have to say, I traveled to lots and lots of places when I was working doing trade shows, and I would have to rate Atlantic City as being the dumpster, the dumpster of one of the worst places I had the opportunity to ever visit. Yeah, it was horrifying. The shocking poverty and stuff in that place in the 80s was just off the charts. But anyway, so that's why they targeted it. It was already poor to start with, right? So prior to that time, of course, the mob had already established Nevada as the only outpost of legalized gambling on U.S. soil. So yeah, they went after Atlantic City, and boy, not looking good now. So, in the wake of this meeting, the resources of Resorts International were used publicly and privately to begin the lobbying campaign that resulted in the legalizing of gambling in Atlantic City. And once the New Jersey legislature opened up the Garden State resorts, moved in. In 1987, upon the death of longtime CIA frontman James Crosby, the nominal head of Resorts International, up and coming young New York real estate, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm doing okay, but it's just the radiation jumbles things sometimes. Let me start over here. In 1987, upon the death of longtime CIA frontman William Crosby, the nominal head of Resorts International, up and coming young New York real estate tycoon Donald Trump stepped into the picture and bought Crosby's interest in the gambling empire. Funny how that happened, right? Trump soon became a household name with his colorful personality and his insistence upon naming a variety of luxury hotels, apartment houses, and other commercial ventures after himself. But while the name Trump appeared in the headlines, the names of the real movers behind Resorts International remain hidden from public view. After quickly expanding the reach of Resorts International to Atlantic City in the final years of the 1980s, Donald Trump found himself in financial trouble as the real estate market in New York tanked. The 3 casinos in Atlantic City, like other Trump assets, were under threat from lenders. It was only with the assistance and insurance of William L. Ross, R-O-S-S, Senior Managing Director of Rothschild, Inc., that Trump was allowed to keep the casinos and rebuild his threatened empire. This was detailed in a Bloomberg article from March 22, 1992. So, the same Wilbur L. Ross, still Jacob Rothschild's right-hand man, came out to support Trump's nomination in March 26. also reported by Bloomberg. There is a book out, The New Jerusalem Zionist Power in America has done an excellent job of describing the relationship between Donald Trump and Resorts International. And here's some summaries they came up with. In 1987, upon the death of longtime CIA frontman James Crosby, the nominal head of Resorts International, up and coming young New York real estate tycoon Donald Trump stepped into the picture and bought Crosby's interest in the gambling empire. Trump soon became a household name with his colorful personality and his insistence upon naming a variety of luxury hotels, apartment houses, and other commercial ventures after himself. But while the name Trump appeared in the headlines, the names of the real movers behind Resorts International remain hidden from public view. After quickly expanding the reach of Resorts International to Atlantic City in the final years of the 1980s, Donald Trump, or the Don, found himself in financial trouble as the real estate market in New York tanked. They were under threat from lenders, and that's when they brought in Wilbur L. Ross. Let me see. Donald Trump landed on his feet when, ironically, the real estate market in New York turned and his wealth increased dramatically once more. From there, the Trump empire continued to roll forward and eventually expanded its brand into the realm of reality television, the newest method of socioeconomic and cultural engineering. For those wondering, Wilbur L. Ross, ROSS, spent 24 years at the New York office of Rothschild Incorporated. In the late 1990s, he started a $200 million fund at Rothschild Inc. to invest in distressed assets. In the year 2000, on April Fool's Day, Ross raised an additional $450 million to invest in troubled companies. The timing of this strategy could not have been better, as this report from the New York Magazine stated. In the 2001 rolling stock market crash, 9/11, and a globally synchronized recession pushed scores of companies into bankruptcy. New economy high flyers like Enron, WorldCom, and Global Crossing went bust. So did old economic stalwarts in industries like steel and textiles, victims of excess capacity, global competition, and generous union contracts. Um, Wilbur Ross is a millionaire investor who spent a quarter century working for Rothschild. I don't know why I'm so worried about him here. Let me see here. Donald Trump, whose Atlantic City properties were bankrupt and whose net worth was estimated at negative 1.4 billion. But Trump held that it was positive 1.5 billion to hold onto his stake in the Taj Mahal and keep his name on the sign. They say the Trump name added value. Well, I got to get off this Ross. I don't remember why I have this whole thing about this Ross person. But he became a government official, and I'm I'm getting myself way down. So let me scroll past here. I must have thought he was important when I was talking about this later. Yeah. Blackstone is the Rothschild. Let me put this on hold. Okay, let's get into the Don's past. Presidential candidate, or now President Trump, prefers the grandiose titular name, the Donald. In reality, to be honest, to his background, it should be the Mafia Don, as in Don Corleone in the movie The Godfather. Trump's past is so intertwined with organized crime, it's incredible that the hand-wringing GOP anti-establishment or Hillary Clinton have not smeared it across every newspaper in America. Well, they would never do that because they're all mafia, right? So let's talk a little bit about his family. And remember, I've said in the past, these people, they claim they came from poverty, and I think they were probably telling the truth. I think they all came over here. Um, a group of them came over here early on the Mayflower, and they brought in the backup group. The backup group came in early 1900s. Who was backup group? Well, the mafia. They all came in from Italy. So let's talk about Frederick Trump. So Trump was born just at the end of World War II in Jamaica, Queens, New York, some 70 years ago. He was the son of Fred Trump, a major New York real estate and construction developer. It was well known to every taxi driver or bar owner that for anyone to be a success in New York construction, he had to be on friendly terms with the mob, then and today, just like those who run the garbage disposal business or control the harbors. Fred Trump's son Don left business school to join Daddy Fred's construction and real estate business in New York City. Fred's early mentor in the ways of doing slick, shady construction business in New York was one of the sleaziest characters in New York, a lawyer named Roy Cohn. Cohn, once lawyer for the sleazy U.S. Senator Joe McCarthy, reportedly shaped McCarthy's insane, paranoid campaign against unnamed communists in the State Department in the early 1950s. Cohn's biographer Nicholas von Hoffman noted that Cohn lived in a matrix of crime and unethical conduct, derived a significant part of his income from illegal or unethical schemes and conspiracies. His ties to the mob were so close that he allowed top mafia bosses like Frank Costello to hold their meetings in his law office so they could claim lawyer-client immunity privilege. Cohn, who was pronounced dead of AIDS in 1986, was also described by Hoffman as best known non-show business homosexual in the country, was the attorney for a notorious cocaine-snorting Manhattan nightclub in the late 1970s called Studio 54. Hoffman wrote of the orgies at Studio 54 held by Cohn. For special celebrities, the wildest parties were held in the basement with high society's homosexuals, transsexuals, and transvestites. Cohn held some of his biggest birthday bangs, attending on at least one occasion by the important officials of the Democratic, Republican, and Conservative parties. Most of the city's major elected officials attended also. The chief judge of the United States District Court and Roy's usual, Donald Trump. Donald Trump organized crime lawyer. Let me see. In an interview, Trump even described one such Studio 54 orgy he attended. I would watch supermodels getting screwed, well-known models getting screwed, on the bench in the middle of the room. There were seven of them, and each of them was getting screwed by a different guy. This was in the middle of the room. He omitted to say that he was among the seven. In the 1970s, when Trump was in his 20s, he hired Roy Cohn as his attorney and fixer as he took over his father's real estate and construction. I think I'm going to skim past some of this stuff because I need to close off this file pretty soon here. I'm about at my limit today. Yeah, but how this really started is Trump's dad, Fred, he got his start by doing government things. His dad wasn't rich or wealthy. He got his job, he got his money by bilking the government out of contracts to build housing. All of these people, you will notice, they all are at the right there getting tax dollars, right? They always want to get their hands, and you notice the mafia is always into they're into all of the they got to have a guy do this, they got to have a guy do that. So anyway, I think I've said about what I'm going to say about him there. I'm not going to be. I have a lot more about these cons, but I think we get the idea here. I certainly have a lot of links down below for you to take a look. the story about those boys and all of that stuff that made those kids live that way is just horrible. I'm going to put this on hold for a second. What I'm going to do is just pick out a few things here. These people have been racist from the very beginning. I found an old article, and it said, that time Trump's father was arrested at a KKK rally. Yeah, believe it or not, I found an article, and I'll have it down below if you take a look at it. It says, today, Donald Trump continues to claim ignorance with regard to the harm caused by white supremacy movements. After the violence that occurred this weekend, during which more than 30 people were injured and 3 were killed at a white supremacist party in Charlottesville, Virginia, Donald Trump made a statement that people on both sides of the political spectrum took issue with. He said, we condemn in the strongest possible term this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides, he said, on many sides. You notice how they always want to draw us into their language, right? They're always saying things like, yeah, it really is human nature that most people, if they saw a big pile of money, they would get rid of the other people and just steal it because that's really what human nature. They say these things with such authority, like, everybody does this, right? So everybody's doing it. Why not you? So, and he said, it went on to say, he failed to mention the hate groups responsible for the rally. His comments on there being many sides that needed condemning suggest that people other than the hate groups were somehow at fault in all of this. Many sides also suggest that there is no right side or wrong side, that they are all morally equal. So, so his dad was at a Ku Klux Klan rally in New York on Memorial Day 1927. On that day, approximately 1,000 white-robed Klansmen marched through Queens in opposition to Roman Catholic police. Liberty and democracy have been trampled upon when native-born Protestant Americans dared to protest the American flag, one school, one blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so Fred Trump, who was 23 at the time, was listed as one of these 7 men arrested at the rally by the New York Times. So, so Dad got arrested for being a pretty big racist at a KKK meeting, I would say, right? They use that kind of language. Well, everybody does it. And then they married Trump in one of her shows. I was watching her talk about when they did some horrible things to her brother, or to her father. They just shrugged and they say, well, it always happens this way. Yes. So that's why they're always using that kind of language, because they want to make us feel like, this is the way it is. So let me tell you a little bit about Roy Cohn's family before I get going here. He was born in 1927, New York City, raised in a Park City apartment. His father, Albert Cohn, was a justice in the appellate district of the state Supreme Court and wielded quite a bit of power. His mother, Dora Marcos, doted on her gifted young son, who was admittedly showing a strong intellect by his age. By the time he was 20, Cohn completed his studies at the field school in the New York's Bronx's posh Riverdale neighborhood. He went to Columbia College and Columbia Law School. He was a precocious, brilliant, arrogant young man, but he performed ably and energetically on such cases as the William Remington perjury trial, the Rosenberg spy trial, and the big New York trial of top communist leaders. Cohn was admitted to the bar at 21 and immediately used his familiar connections to get on the staff of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. He quickly established himself as a sharp assistant U.S. attorney focused on subversive activities, which would soon cement his legacy. It was the trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, 2 American citizens accused of Soviet espionage and trading atomic secrets, that demonstrated Cohn as a fearsome force. His direct examination of Ethel's brother, David Greenglass, was essential in securing the couple's conviction and subsequent execution. The Rosenbergs could not be charged with treason because that charge would require the U.S. to be at war with the Soviet Union. So they were thus charged with espionage and accused of selling nuclear secrets, but the punishment wouldn't be any less severe. So it was a very sad case, and Roy Cohn, his name is giving me trouble, but anyway, so they say when the USSR, Russia, was detonating their first atomic bomb in September 1949, supposedly based on information they obtained from spies. This testimony sealed Ethel and Julius Rosenberg's fates. It was only in 2003 that the truth came out. So, yeah, well, they were pitted against each other, and I think even if the husband was spying, I don't think the mother had anything to do with it. But I think I've got to wrap up this file. So yeah, they've all been, and all of these elite people, all the elite people founded the CIA. All of the elite people founded all of these things. So the fact that Khan came from a wealthy family and was well connected, it also speaks to their kind of their mental capabilities, right? I mean, if you're raised and everybody tells you your mother was so ugly that she could never find a man, and then she dotes on you and you become a gay little boy and stuff, and it brings a very different kind of family dynamic, if you were to ask me. So I'm going to be closing this off. Let me read this. It says, the sobering truth about Khan and Trump, for that matter, is that they were natural spawn of a society that cloaks systematic oppression in the guise of democracy while rewarding bad behavior so long as it's privileged. Monsters like Khan are created by a nation that judges its people based on the level of their clout rather than the content of their character. Khan embodies the primal urge to succeed at all costs, and the first step toward defeating him is to root him out in ourselves. That's why I think a lot of people don't really want to say much bad things about all these wealthy people like the Trumps of the world and Elon Musk. They seem to always want to idolize, oh, he's the smartest, richest person in the entire world. Well, truly, anybody with a quarter of a brain could see that these are not the smartest people in the room, right? So then we have to question, why are they this way? Well, I would have to say it's because the way they were raised, and it has nothing to do with anything than that. And I'm certainly not defending them. I'm just saying that you don't go to battle with somebody, and right now we're at battle with these people. You must understand who they are. What are their weaknesses? What are their strengths? How do they function? They do not understand anything about us. We can use this as an opportunity to learn more and more about what makes them work. And remember, it just takes us also paying attention. This is not a mystery. I think it's quite simple. The same group of people took over a couple hundred years ago. Then they sent over their relatives from Italy, the Mafia gang, and I will be back with so much more of this Mafia business. I'm going to be doing it in segments, and what do I have next? Let me see here. Okay, I don't want to weigh this down, so I'm going to be closing off this file now. I'll be back with, I've got all this Mafia stuff. Where are they sending the drugs from? How are they getting it here? What are they doing? Who's involved? And it's too much for me right now, so be safe out there and goodbye for now, and I'll be back when I can. Oh, I think I'll just come back soon with a really quick show about this fentanyl, because that's a pretty big lie that's going to be at the center of all this. So be safe out there and goodbye for now.